Welcome back. To the U.S., the historic second impeachment trial for former President Donald Trump begins today, and the Democrat-led Senate has laid out framework.
Let me say that again. All parties have agreed to a structure that will ensure a fair and honest Senate impeachment trial of the former president. Each side will have ample time to make their arguments.
How much time? Well, they're going to have 16 hours to present their argument before breaking on Friday. Prosecutors are expected to rely heavily on video from the deadly attack on the U.S. Capitol and Trump's rally speech just hours before. The violent insurrection sent lawmakers scrambling to hide as the mob breached the Capitol building. And the Senate impeached Trump a week later, alleging it was his earlier speech that incited the mob to attack Congress. So a lot of people will be watching today. CNN's Karin Caifa joining us now live from Washington with a setup of what we can expect to hear and the voices and key players here. Good morning to you, Karin.
Good morning to you, Melanie.
So let's talk about...
Yeah, so we're going to see things get started about one... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. I was just going to ask you about the timeline on how it's all going to work out today.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry about that. We are going to get things started here about 1 p.m. this afternoon, Washington time. We're going to see the Senate come in and approve that framework that you talked about, agreed to by the Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, the Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, and also the House impeachment managers and the Trump defense team. As you said, 16 hours, up to 16 hours for each side to make their case. They're going to get through a lot of pre-trial things today. Among them, hearing 4 hours of debate as to whether these proceedings are constitutional at all. This is something that the Trump defense team is going to be arguing that it's not, because Trump has already left the White House. But you'll likely hear a lot of pushback on that from the House impeachment managers, because the actions in question were made when President Trump was still President Trump. So you'll hear a lot of back and forth on that. They'll take a vote on that. And with Democrats in the majority in the Senate, it's unlikely that that motion to dismiss the case will go anywhere, and things will proceed as is charted in those rules that were laid out, Melanie.
Karin, a lot of people are going to say, now that he's a private citizen, why bother? So what is the answer to that? Why bother with this?
Well, the House impeachment managers will, again, argue that these actions that are in question were taking place while Trump was still the occupant of the Oval Office. They'll say that there is no January exception for this kind of behavior. They're also going to make the case that, in addition to what he said on January 6th, that these kinds of things were building well before, that Trump really set the table for arguing that the election was illegitimate. Of course, there have been multiple inquiries, and nobody has found any indication of widespread electoral fraud here in the United States election in November 2020. They also believe it's important to really have this case laid out before the American people because, of course, Trump has floated the idea of running for office again in 2024. Now, in the unlikely scenario that the Senate did move to convict former President Trump in this trial, and of course they would need at least 17 Republicans on board. It's unlikely that they'll get that. If they did do that, they could take the extra step of holding a vote as to whether Trump should be barred from holding office ever again. So a lot of these kinds of questions really getting into the public eye, some things that voters, if they are still supportive of President Trump and what he did, things to think about over the next 4 years or so if Trump should decide to mount another bid in 2024.
So, Karin, we are not expecting to hear from any witnesses, but could that change as we go through the week to hear from more voices?
Yeah, the option is there for the House impeachment managers to call for a vote on additional witnesses, but both Democrats and Republicans do agree on one thing around this trial, and that is that they don't want it to drag on for too long. Republicans want to get this out of the public eye as quickly as possible, and Democrats, they want to really be able to tackle President Biden's ambitious agenda, which, of course, front and center right now is that massive $1.9 trillion COVID relief proposal that they are tasked with turning into legislation, pushing through the House and Senate, and getting it back to his desk for a signature. So both parties here with an interest in keeping this short and sweet. We know that House impeachment managers had inquired as to whether President Trump would testify in this. His lawyer said no, so that kind of removes the prospect of that spectacle. As to any other witnesses that they might call, Melanie, this is very different from the first impeachment trial in that you did want to hear from a lot of witnesses who had a lot of background and could offer more context as to that phone call and the implications of the phone call that took place between President Trump and Ukrainian President Zelensky that was at the crux of the first impeachment impeachment trial. Democrats believe this is a little bit more clear-cut. The American people watched these events play out on their televisions on January 6th. They heard the rhetoric that led up to January 6th, and so Democrats believe that maybe they don't need as many expert witnesses as they did during the first impeachment trial.
Karin, finally for you, what is the security situation like there? Is it still escalated right now? Are you still seeing a lot of people out on the streets? What are eyes on at the moment?
Yeah, all eyes are really on the Capitol. That fence, that non-scalable fence that went up around the Capitol complex after January 6th remains in place, as do a number of National Guard troops. It is expected there will be a National Guard presence in and around the Capitol, at least until the end of this trial. Federal law enforcement officials say they haven't heard word of any kind of specific credible threat against the Capitol during this trial. But of course, with the events of January 6th front and center in the arguments on both sides, this is something that is going to be carefully watched. The 9 House impeachment managers are trailed by a security detail when they make their way around the Capitol. And there is, of course, extra security around senators as well. So again, even though there has been no specific credible threat against the Capitol, they're not taking any chances, Melanie.
Karin, appreciate your time in breaking this all down for us. Thank you.
You bet.
Okay, we're sitting at 34 minutes after the hour, checking in with Debo Brown.